So today I want to bring you a very interesting Balisong. This is the newest addition to my Balisong collection, and I'm very excited to have it. I have an interesting story on how I got it, as well as a bunch of history on the knife itself. But before I get into all those boring details for some, interesting details for others, I'm just going to go ahead and show the knife and talk about it a little bit here first. So here it is. This is a knife from Germany, marked Schoepp. S-C-H-O-E-P-P. This one is a ruler style Balisong, which was very popular in the 1880s all the way up to like the 1910s and 20s. More commonly used by carpenters for the obvious reason that there's rulers on the front and back, so you have a way to measure different things, as well as fishermen. So it's a popular fisherman's knife. There's actually later versions of this knife that had bails on it, and those were more specifically for fishermen so they can have it tied to a string so it doesn't fall off the boat into the water and they lose it. There's actually a really great example. I'm going to show you a picture right now, and this is of a K-bar fisherman's Balisong from 1920. So anyway, taking a closer look at this one, one thing the Balisong guys will notice is that there's no tang pin here, which is fascinating. The handles are actually made up of a single piece of steel that is rolled over. So it's basically just sheet metal. And that's how you get that design. Instead of using separate pieces and spacers and stuff, it's a single piece for each handle here and just simple pins. This one's actually still stiff. It is the worst flipping because it's not flippable, it's stiff. But this is a collector's piece. I'm not just gonna start banging out moves with this thing. So I like it that it's stiff. It's not going to fall apart anytime soon. So what it is interesting though, like I said, there's no tang pin or anything here. So as you're opening it, you can see it almost looks like it's broken, right? That's because the handles have to be completely together and then it straightens out. So you have stability when you're actually cutting things. All right, whereas normally a tang pin would create that tension and keep the blade straight and also have a certain space in between the handles. But you can see the latch here is brass. It does latch both open and closed. It's very lightweight because of the sheet metal design here. It's a high carbon blade. What kind? I don't know. Couldn't tell you. That's as far as I can figure out as far as the steel on there. As far as the actual history of this, it actually took me like 4 or 5 hours of research because there's not just like one website you can go to and just look this up. Okay, even though I have dozens of different books on Balisongs and antique knives, none of them just say, okay, here's what it is, here's the markings to look for. There's little bits of information here and there, all across the internet, across a bunch of different sources, different books. I contacted a couple old Balisong friends back in the 90s that I knew were very knowledgeable about antiques. And it's just, like I said, it's a bunch of little puzzle pieces and you have to kind of form them back together to get a better picture of what you're looking at here. So to most people, it would just be an old knife. If you didn't care about knives, it would just be a cheap knife. You say, hey, why would you want this? It's pretty cheap. But for me, it's an amazing find just because I love the history of knives and because I love Balisong so much and the design. I love it as a conversation piece and a part of my collection. So this will be in the collection forever. I'll talk about different knives that I collect in a future video. But yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating to me. This knife, from what I understand, from everything that I read and learned, was made right in and around 1910. So that makes this over 100 years old. And I think it's in pretty decent condition for being over 100. It's no longer sharp. I could sharpen it, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to keep it in this condition that I have it right now. As far as the markings, let me show you the tang stamps here. On the front side here, once that focuses, you can see that it says patent. And on the reverse, in smaller font, if I get that to focus correctly, you can see the Schoepp, S-C-H-O-E-P-P, Germany. Now if I go down towards the handles here, on the one side it says Madrid, and from my research I found that a lot of times the handles were made over in Spain, shipped to Germany, and then they made their own German blades and constructed the knives in Germany to be again sent back to the States or other countries. So these models from Germany, a lot of times they do say Madrid on the handles. On the other side, it just says meter. And that's it as far as markings go. So this would be marketed for fishermen, just again because of the the measurements on there, having an actual ruler, which is kind of nice. If you're a fisherman, you can check the size of your fishes or fish hooks or whatever the case may be. And also carpenters, again, for an obvious reason. If you're doing any kind of carpentry, you need a ruler. Hey, your pocket knife also serves as a ruler. So very, very fascinating, super cool, over 100-year-old Balisong. So when I first got this, I had referenced the Bernard Levine book, which I actually did a whole video on. Fantastic book on knife history if you haven't seen the other video, and this is literally the same page I showed in the other video about Balisongs. This basically confirmed that in Germany and France and the Philippines, there was a lot of Balisongs coming into the States, and there was a big boom around the 1880s, okay? From 1880 all the way up to like 1920, tons of Balisongs coming into the US, and specifically from one German company, and they were known by a couple different names, Bontjen and Sabin. They were also known as Bonza Work, and they actually had a bunch of different labels that they would use, a bunch of different branding basically. But there's one master company that all the Balisongs were made in Solingen, Germany. And from what I understand, the Schoep brand was one of their sub-brands, essentially. They were very, very popular. The company opened in 1867, and they lasted all the way to 1983, is when they closed down. But all through the late 1800s and early 20th century, they were very famous for their razors. They made tons of razors and razor blades for different companies. So pretty fascinating history here. So actually, in looking up this knife and getting little bits and pieces, little puzzle pieces here and there, and trying to form it together to figure out exactly when this knife came out, because originally when I first saw it, I'm like, oh, that's got to be from like the late 1800s. I did find a great example of a Bontjen and Sabin Balisong. I'll show you a picture of that right now. This is from the 1880s. But if you notice, the design is a little bit different. There is a tang pin, and the latch system is a little different as well. Now, if you look at this picture shows a Irma Balisong from 1910. Now, the Irma Balisong has the exact same patent logo that's on the front, which again was a derivative of the Bontjen and Sabin. So it's the exact same font, and they also use the same brass latch. So I'm extremely confident that this was manufactured around 1910 to 1920. So yeah, I mean, it took a very long time to figure that out. Like I said, I mean, little bits of information here and there scattered all across the internet, but it's not all consolidated into one spot. Especially when you're looking at knives that are 100 plus years old, it's a little shoddy. It's, bigger time gaps and stuff, and not as much information. Really, really interesting, just pure Balisong history here. Like I said, this is the worst flipping Balisong, but I have no intentions of flipping it or sharpening it and using it. It's just a collectible. So if you guys have a Balisong collection, or if you have any Balisong, write down in the comments, how old is your Balisong? Previous to this one, the oldest Balisong that I've ever personally owned was from the late 60s. And of course, back in the 90s, when I first got into knives, I had a ton of 80s style Balisongs, some Taylor Setos, a bunch of different Frost Cutlery, Parker Gypsy. I did have a couple of the International Series Benchmades. Before Benchmade, it was Pacific Cutlery Co. And before that, it was just Balisongs Inc., I think. Balisong USA. So it was Balisong USA in the late 70s, and then all throughout the 80s, Benchmade was called Pacific Cutlery Co. And then, of course, eventually they became Benchmade. But yeah, that's where they got their start, obviously, is in Balisongs. It's always been a staple in the Balisong community. Definitely an old school company for that kind of stuff. But not as old school as this guy right here. So yeah, I just wanted to show that to you. I'm very, very excited about it. So real quick, I'll tell you the backstory, how I got this. This was one of those super late night eBay finds. I had bad allergies about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or so. And I couldn't sleep. I was congested, dry eyes, the whole thing. I was just uncomfortable. So I woke up at like 3 in the morning randomly. And I decided to go on my phone for a little bit, try to get tired. And I was looking on eBay for older knives, which occasionally I'll do. And I saw this, and I was super interested. It was starting at like $20 or something. It got up to, I want to say, like $150. I was watching it. There was a couple hours left. I was on the fence about buying it, or at least bidding for it. And then the guy who was selling it ended the auction, and I have no idea why. He completely cut the auction, so it was no longer there. It wasn't for sale anymore. And I was like super bummed. So like 2 days later, or no, I'm sorry, it was the next day. The next day, I happened to be looking again. Now I'm specifically looking for old Balisongs. And it had a totally different title, but he reposted it for like another 4 or 5 days, whatever it happened to be. And so I put it on my watch list, I went to auction, and I won it at the last second. So that is always fun. Usually I get sniped out for eBay because I'm not one of those people that like watches the end of the auction, because usually they end at like weird, funky times. So I just, I bid the highest I'm willing to pay, and I usually lose by 50 cents, and then I'm all bummed that I would have spent 50 cents more. But anyway, usually I'm not watching it. This one I happened to watch to the very end, and when I won it, I was super excited about it. And here it is. So it's going to be a permanent part of my Balisong collection. Again, purely as a conversation piece and a collectible. That is all. Current value on this, I'm not going to say what I paid for it. I will say I paid less than $100 for sure. But I would say right this moment, this is probably, it's hard to value these old Balisongs, but it's anywhere from like $300 to $600 in its current condition. If this were brand new and not used, it would be over $1,000. So I'm pretty happy with the find. I'm not specifically looking for antique Balisongs, but it's really nice to have one in the collection. All right, so before you go, I just want to show you something completely random because I thought it was interesting. In flipping through the book, I've read this book literally front to back at least twice in my life, but it was many years ago. So occasionally I'll grab it and I'll reference, just like with this Balisong. But I happened to stumble across this. I thought this was pretty cool. There's a lot of antique Swiss Army knives that were just purely like a collectible, decorative thing. It was totally like a sign of wealth back in the day. Obviously, this isn't a very practical Swiss Army knife here. You see with the million different tools that's on here, and each one's like engraved and ornate and everything. But this was the value back in 1997, by the way. Approximately $350,000. That's about the most expensive knife I've ever seen. So yeah, if you thought a $500 knife was expensive, now you have something to reference. So thanks for watching. Hope you guys have an awesome day, and I'll see you soon. Take care.